Welcome to Mind-Body Bridging for Stress Management. My name is Deborah Disney. In this presentation, I will introduce you to a brain-based technique that you can use to effectively manage stress. I don't know if this is true for you, but it seems to me that there are only two times I feel stress. Day and night. Life in our fast-paced culture seems to set us up for ongoing stress. What I intend to accomplish in this presentation includes befriending the brain. I believe that it can be helpful to understand how the brain works, since it's the main organ responsible for our thoughts and feelings. So, understanding the role it plays in our experience of stress can help us to manage stress better. I'll also talk about how the body gives us warning signals to let us know when we are on a collision course with stress. There is no doubt that there is a mind-body connection. If you were to tell somebody they have cancer, in most people, you could immediately detect chemicals of fear in their bloodstream. If you were to tell somebody they won the lottery, in most people, you could immediately detect chemicals of pleasure in their bloodstream. The mind and body are communicating with each other all the time, so we can train ourselves to understand the messages that the body gives to us that let us know when we are stressed. And once we're aware that we're on a collision course with stress, we can use mind-body bridging to calm the effects of stress. And there are three major tools of mind-body bridging that I'll introduce to you today. And after today's presentation, you'll be able to apply these three tools in your own lives to reduce the effects of stress in your daily life. This presentation is based on the work of Dr. Stanley Block. Dr. Block is a medical doctor whose research focuses on the brain, and he's written a number of books summarizing his research. Today's presentation is based on his book entitled Mind-Body Workbook for Stress. What I'm presenting to you is just a tip of the iceberg of mind-body bridging. We'll basically only cover chapter 1 of this book. Mind-body bridging is a very deep, very rich technique, so if you like what you learned today, I encourage you to get this book and work through the remaining 8 chapters. But even if you go no deeper into mind-body bridging beyond what we cover today, I believe that you will still find these tools to be extremely useful in managing stress. Let's start by actually doing mind-body bridging. Then later, when I describe the brain's role in stress, I think it will make more sense having experienced the technique already. So please get out 2 blank pieces of paper. On the first paper, draw a circle in the middle of the page, any size. I'd like for you to think of some event that occurred in the past week that was unpleasant. Perhaps it didn't turn out the way you wanted it to, or perhaps you didn't function as well in that situation as you wish you had. And if you can think of something from the past week, that's helpful, only because the memory will still be fresh. However, maybe this past week's been pretty mild, so you can choose to bring to mind any unpleasant event in your history. Now, if the memory of that event were a short story, what would the descriptive title be? Write that title in the circle. And this is going to be for your eyes only. Go ahead and pause this until you think of something and write that title in the circle. This is the example that was given in the book. I do not have enough money for my bills this month. The next step is to scatter your thoughts and feelings anywhere outside of the circle. For this example from the book, some thoughts were, I have too many bills, what if we lose our house, I'll never be able to retire, and my spouse spends too much money, and the feelings included being angry, scared, and guilty. Please pause this recording and take a couple of minutes to scatter your thoughts and feelings about the unpleasant event anywhere on the outside of the circle. Now at the bottom of the page, write a word or two that are adjectives that describe the overall tone of what you wrote. For this example, the tone was negative and the thoughts were scattered. Also at the bottom of the page, describe any body tension you felt. This person experienced a tight chest and rapid breathing as they were writing. And this step is extremely important, so give yourself a minute to be very specific about how your body felt while you were writing. Pause if you need to. When I give this presentation in a group setting, I go around the room and ask for volunteers to tell us what they wrote at the bottom of the page. And it's always interesting to see the variety of answers. There are no right or wrong answers here. Some people will notice that the body tension for them included a headache. For others, the muscles in their shoulders were tight. For some, the stomach was in knots or queasy, and still others will say maybe their legs were fidgety. What's important is for you to notice how your body felt. This is your body's warning light, alerting you that the mind-body connection is getting agitated. You have a fuel light on the dash of your car that tells you to be aware that the vehicle needs attention, and you know what that attention is that it needs. It needs fuel. And if you ignore that for very long, soon the vehicle won't function properly. So whatever you wrote at the bottom of this page is your body's warning light. Be aware of it when it appears. It's the early warning light telling you that the vehicle of your mind-body needs attention. And if you ignore it for very long, soon this mind-body vehicle won't function properly. You might be on the road toward a panic attack or road rage or a screaming match with someone, whatever it is, but if we become aware of the early warning lights, we can take action and avoid the poor functioning. Here I want to reiterate that there is a mind-body connection. When the mind has scattered thoughts, the body tends to feel tension. The body tension is this vehicle's early warning light that we might be on a path toward lower functioning. So know the warning lights that are unique to your body. I'll tell a little funny story here that the car I have now has an ESC light on the dash, and I first became aware of this light during the winter of 2013-2014, the year that Central Illinois had record snowfall. ESC means electronic stability control. I was driving on an unplowed street with uneven clumps of snow, and when the ESC system detects this condition, it activates to try to help you stay in control of your vehicle. I didn't know that. The first time I saw the ESC light flashing, I thought, escape? I'm supposed to escape? It kind of scared me. Well, perhaps for years you have experienced the early warning lights that your body flashes for you, and it might even be scary to experience those signs. Instead, I encourage you to simply be grateful for them because they are truly early warning signs to signal you that it's time to do something to calm the mind-body connection. Okay, please take out your second piece of paper. Again, draw a circle in the middle of the page, any size, and whatever you wrote in the center of your first circle, please write that again in the center of this circle. But before we complete this map, we're going to do a step that Dr. Block calls coming to your senses. I will lead you through a 3 or 4 minute period in which our intention is to heighten our awareness of bodily sensations. When I first started leading counseling clients through this step, I would give them a cotton ball with lavender oil. However, I've found that the sense of smell is very powerful, and though I love the scent of lavender, some people either really don't like it or are even allergic to it. So when you're doing this step at home, you can choose any of the senses that you want, but today I'm going to focus on fairly benign sensations, the sense of touch and the sense of hearing. The purpose of this step is to allow your thoughts to come to the present moment. And one of the best ways to come to the present moment is to focus on your body's experience in the here and now. Even though we are setting the intention to stay in the present moment, you'll likely find that the brain is a very busy organ that works overtime. We want to give it a short vacation from thought, but it keeps working, maybe pulling your thoughts into thoughts of the past or thoughts of the future. When you realize that the thoughts have wandered away from the present moment, you'll simply label the thought as a thought and gently bring your attention back to a bodily sensation. Here's an example of thought labeling. Often when people are learning this for the first time, they might have the thought, I wonder whether I'm doing this right. Labeling it as a thought would sound like this: I'm having the thought that I wonder whether I'm doing this right. Later, we'll talk about why thought labeling is so helpful, but for now, the instruction is simply to focus on bodily sensations, and when you become aware that thoughts have pulled you away from the present moment, label the thought as a thought, and then gently come back to your senses. If you feel comfortable closing your eyes, do so, and if not, that's fine. Just gaze at something that's a few feet in front of you, or even at this photo of waterfalls. Okay, let's start with the sense of touch. Move your attention to the pressure of your feet on the floor. Pay attention to the pressure of your bottom on the chair, your back against the chair, move your hands so that they're palm down on your legs, and gently move your fingertips back and forth on the fabric of your clothes. Paying attention to the texture of what your fingers are feeling. And let your hands rest. As we're focusing on bodily sensations, you might find your mind wandering, and it's totally normal for thoughts to try to pull us away from the present moment. Simply label a thought as a thought and return to an awareness of bodily sensations. Now let's move to the sense of hearing. Allow yourself to move your attention to any background sounds you hear. Where I am, I hear a clock ticking in the background, traffic sounds in the distance. Whatever you hear, just allow yourself to pay attention to those sounds. Maybe even try moving a hand and rubbing behind an ear, and pay attention to the light sound that makes. And lower your hand and let it rest. Again, if thoughts intrude, just label them as thoughts and gently return to an awareness of bodily sensations. And finally, let's move the attention to the breath. Feel the air tickle your nostrils on the way in, as if you were smelling roses, and purse your lips slightly as if you were blowing out a candle, and feel the air glide over your tongue on the way out. Continue to smell the roses, blow out the candle. Everyone breathes at a different pace, and always give your body the breath it needs. But see if you can make your breath a little slower and a little deeper. Feeling the air tickle your nostrils on the way in. Feeling the air glide over your tongue on the way out. Now, in a second, I'll ask you to open your eyes, and once the eyes are open, the brain gets really busy again. I'll encourage you to keep coming to your senses. You don't have to do everything that we just did. Just focus on the sense that worked best for you to keep your thoughts in the present moment. If you liked the sense of touch, then as you complete the second map, you might also focus on the touch of the pen in your hand. Maybe you'd like to try the sense of sight, being aware of the ink gliding across the page. Okay, go ahead and open your eyes. and complete your second map. Use the senses of your choice, but keep coming back to your senses while you write your thoughts and feelings about this unpleasant event. Pause this recording and take a couple of minutes to complete this map. You might want to pause the recording again so that you can jot down a few words that describe the nature of the thoughts on this map and a description of how your body feels now. Now look at your two maps side by side and compare the two maps. There's no right or wrong answer, just notice what's the same, what's different. As you compare the two maps, is there a difference in body tension? Is there a difference in the tone of the words? And if the situation, the unpleasant situation were happening now, while you're in this mind-body state, it's interesting to wonder whether you might have responded better. So again, I'd like to mention this mind-body connection. To notice this correlation, that when the mind has scattered thoughts, the body tends to feel tension and we tend to not function at our best. And often that is the mind-body state that people experience when they're doing map 1. And in contrast, when the thoughts are not as scattered, when the body is not feeling as much tension, we tend to function better. And that tends to be how people experience the mind-body connection when they're completing the second map. So there is this mind-body connection, and it leads to how well we function in our daily lives. People often will mention that they feel more relaxed after coming to their senses. If this was not your experience, it doesn't mean that you did it wrong. It might just be that you were remembering a highly charged situation for you. And if I were working with you individually, we would then try to find a bodily sensation that would work well for you to help calm the mind-body state. But most of the time, people do report feeling more relaxed at this point. And I find it interesting that I did not specifically ask you to calm down or relax. Think back to this step called coming to your senses. What do you remember me asking you to do as I guided you through that? I asked you to be aware of the sense of touch. I asked you to move your attention to background sounds that you were hearing. I asked you to pay attention to how your body was experiencing breath. These are all very, very simple tasks that you can do on your own in your daily lives. And the very simple task of paying attention to bodily sensations allowed the brain to come back to the present moment, and the result was a calmer mind-body state. The memory of the situation didn't change. The only thing that changed was the state of the mind-body connection in response to that memory. So a foundational question in mind-body bridging is, which version of the brain is currently driving the bus? And I'll explain that in more detail in a little bit, but for now, I'd like for you to entertain the idea that your brain was in one mode during map 1, and it was in a different mode in map 2. Okay, so now we have a reference point to discuss some of the mind-body bridging terms. When you were creating your first map, you were likely experiencing something that Dr. Block calls an overactive identity system, or I system for short. So let's spend a few minutes talking about what an I system is. Dr. Block says that the human identity system actually evolved for helpful reasons. It's the I system that helps us to understand who we are, what our likes and dislikes are, what behavior do we think is okay for us to have, what behavior do we think is okay for others to have, and how do we believe the world is supposed to work. So it's the I system that helps us to identify with being a part of a family, a religion, a culture, a nation. It provides us a perception of who we are. But let's talk for a minute about perceptions. I'd like to propose that It's not what happens to us that causes the most stress, but instead that it's what we believe about what happens to us that tends to cause the most stress. Let me give a little story to explain that. Let's say that the event that happens is eating hot peppers. I imagine that for some of you, when you eat hot peppers, it is a pleasurable experience, and that for some people it is not a pleasurable experience. So it's not the event itself of eating hot peppers that results in a feeling of pleasure or pain, but instead the story that we work up in our heads about it. You see, everybody on the planet probably has the same sensory experience to hot peppers. Almost everybody, their eyes water, the nose runs, the mouth burns. My husband has a bald spot on the top of his head that sweats, and the more that it sweats, the more he likes it. So we almost all have the same sensory experience. But for some of us, we've worked up a story in our heads that, oh, this is wonderful, this is the way food is supposed to be, and so that leads to a feeling of pleasure. But for some people, they work up a story in their heads, this is horrible, I don't understand why hot peppers even exist, and who ever thought to put it in food? And it leads to a feeling of pain. So it's not the event itself that caused the feeling, but instead what we believe about the event that causes the feeling. So this is just a silly little story just to illustrate the point. I know that there are certain things in the human experience, like finding out that you have cancer or a loved one dying, that of course is going to be an intense feeling. But I would like to suggest that there are some situations that how we feel is determined more by how we have interpreted the situation, the story that we've worked up in our heads. I am from Washington. I don't live there now, but a lot of my family and friends do still live there. And the tornado happened in November 17th of 2013. And many of my family and friends lost their homes. So the event happened, and some people had intense feelings of hopelessness, while others had feelings of, okay, we've got to, now what's the next step? What needs to be done next? So it's not the event that causes the most distress. It's what we believe about the event that tends to cause the most distress. So I think it's helpful to remember also that the identity system is useful, but also it is a perception. It's a perception of who we are. I mentioned earlier that a foundational question in mind-body bridging is this one. Which version of the brain is currently driving the bus? The brain has two drivers, two modes. In one mode, the identity system is overactive and it's hijacked the brain. And for many people, that's what they experienced in the first map. Think of the situation that you wrote in the center of your circle. Your identity system probably has some strong opinions about what should have happened in that situation. Perhaps you had some ideas about how others should have behaved in that situation, maybe some opinions about how you should have behaved, and maybe even some opinions about what the outcome should have been. More than likely, it didn't all happen the way you wanted it to. And so the identity system takes that and hijacks the brain, causing you to experience a great deal of stress. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Then we did a step called coming to your senses. And we set the intention to give the brain a short vacation from thought. We focused on what the body was experiencing just in this present moment, through touch, through hearing, focusing on breathing. And this calmed the identity system, which resulted in the brain switching drivers, switching modes, so that when we completed the second map, The other driver was driving the bus of the brain. And in this second mode, the identity system is at rest. A little bit later, when we look at the biology of the brain, we'll talk a little more about why these two activities, coming to our senses and thought labeling, can have such a calming effect on the brain. Let's look at another visual that helps to illustrate the identity system's role in stress. This is just another way to look at the two modes of the brain, the two drivers of the brain. On the left side, the diagram illustrates the mode of brain in which the identity system is overactive. And on the right side, the diagram illustrates the mode of brain in which the identity system is at rest. Each person has a true self. The true self is a combination of our own life experiences, intelligence, knowledge, education, creativity, and 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, our true self is connected to a wellspring of healing, power, goodness, and wisdom. For people with a spiritual bent, it might help to think of the wellspring as being God or a higher power. For people who don't have a religious background, the wellspring might be thought of as a universal consciousness. In whichever way you can best conceptualize that wellspring, basically it's that universal wisdom that keeps your blood pumping, your lungs breathing, keeps the earth exactly the right distance from the sun that we don't burn up from being too close and we don't freeze from being too far away. It's our birthright to have a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week connection to that wellspring. And when we're aware of that connection, we function quite well. We feel connected to ourselves and to others, and we feel confident that we can handle just about anything that life throws our way. However, there are circumstances in life that can ignite the identity system. Remember, the identity system is our perception of how the world should be, how we should be, how others should be. And if a circumstance happens that violates that perception, in other words, a circumstance happens in which things didn't turn out the way we thought they should, the identity system can become overactive, exploding into a commotion machine. In this mode of brain, it clutters our minds with negative thoughts and literally embeds the negativity into every cell of the body, causing increased body tension. Perhaps the situation that you wrote in the center of the circle is one such circumstance. When this mode of the brain is driving the bus, our functioning changes. We tend to not perceive that connection to the wellspring of wisdom, and we start functioning in a mode of just existing day to day with a busy head and a tense body. And we tend to feel separate from others, don't feel as confident that we can handle situations. And this is a very limited way of experiencing life. When that identity system is overactive and has become a commotion machine, it is the source of all human angst. It causes us to falsely identify with feelings and thoughts that set us up to feel separate from others, limiting our awareness of our connection with others, creating anxiety, and literally disrupting the harmony and balance of the mind-body connection. So in mind-body bridging, are we trying to get rid of the identity system? No, actually that's not the goal. In fact, we can't get rid of it. Without it, humans would lack self-interest, direction, and drive. Instead, we really just want to rest it so that it isn't so active. So let's go back to that foundational question of who's driving the bus. Which version of the brain is driving the bus? Remember, there are two modes, and in mind-body bridging, we're trying to help keep the identity system at rest so that the mode of the brain that allows natural free functioning is the one driving the bus. So in this slide, we're looking at those two modes of the brain, the two drivers of the brain. And this slide is combining some terms that are used by Dr. Block, the creator of mind-body bridging, with terms commonly used in neuroscience. And I'd also like to introduce a couple of simpler terms that make a lot of sense to me. So let's start with the terms that we have been using, Dr. Block's terms. In one version of the brain, the identity system is overactive, creating a cluttered mind, creating body tension. And in the other version of the brain, the identity system is at rest, allowing the mind and body to also be calm. In the neuroscience world, you might hear the term default mode network, basically when the brain is in a state of fight, flight, or freeze. And we're going to talk about that more in the next slide. With counseling clients, I often simply use the terms emotional driver or thinker driver. The emotional driver of the brain is in charge when the body is tense and thoughts are scattered, and the thinker driver of the brain is in charge when the mind and body are calm. Let's look at the anatomy of the brain. Think of the purple section as being the forehead. This is where the prefrontal cortex resides, and this is the thinker driver. And deep inside the brain, there are two almond-shaped things called the amygdala. The amygdala is part of the limbic system, which is the emotional driver of the brain. So these are our two drivers. And so when is the emotional driver in charge? Well, basically, whenever we sense that we're in danger. Brains of babies today are wired the same as the brains of babies 3,000 years ago. Our ancestors were being chased by lions and tigers and bears, and when they sensed that their lives were in danger, they needed that fear to trigger the emotional driver to take over. They needed to get the adrenaline rush that would allow them to do whatever it took to get safe. Today, we're not often being chased by lions and tigers and bears, and we don't very often need for the emotional driver to take over. But there are situations, perhaps like the one that you wrote in the center of the circle, that feel dangerous. And the brain tries to protect you. It tries to keep you safe. So it does what it's been programmed for thousands of years to do, to let the amygdala hijack the brain so that you can use the fight, flight, or freeze response to get safe. But when your life is not truly in danger, this is not truly the best version of the brain to allow you to function effectively. Occasionally, in modern life, there are situations in which we do need the emotional driver to take charge. For example, imagine that you're in a front yard with a toddler who starts running toward a busy street. You don't have time for the thinker driver to logically calculate how many seconds you have before the car coming down the street poses a mortal danger to that toddler. The brain senses the danger and literally blocks you from having any access to rational thought. It's like it rolls a stone between the emotional driver and the thinker driver. You simply don't have access to rational thought. The emotional driver hijacks, takes charge, gets you the adrenaline rush you need to run and block the child from the street. But imagine instead a situation that's really maybe just a college student taking a test, or a couple arguing, or a person with a low bank account trying to pay their bills. It might feel dangerous in the moment, but the person's not truly physically in danger. And in those situations, the thinker driver is really the best version of the brain to be driving the bus. So mind-body bridging is a technique to help keep the thinker driver in the driver's seat, even when the emotional driver is trying to hijack the brain. It's a technique that can calm the overactive identity system. How do we know when it's time to use the mind-body bridging techniques? Well, we have to pay attention to the early warning signs. Remember what you wrote at the bottom of map 1? The body tension that you felt when you were writing about the difficult situation? These might be your body's early warning signs. And they might be different signs for different people. Some people will get a headache, some will feel tightness in the muscles of their necks, some will feel nauseous. It's helpful to know what your body's early warning signs are. On our motor vehicles, the warning signs are pretty standard. Probably all drivers are familiar with the fuel light that comes on the dash when the vehicle is getting low on fuel. We know that the vehicle is saying, "Hey, wake up, I need some attention." And we know that if we ignore that warning light, the vehicle will soon not function as well as it could. And we know what to do. Put fuel in the tank. Well, the body tension you felt in map 1 might be your body's early warning signal that something needs attention, and that if you ignore it, pretty soon the vehicle of your mind-body will not function as well as it could. You might fall into a panic attack, a rage, or some other version of fight, flight, or freeze. So it's helpful to pay attention to those early warning signs, to catch it early, to know, okay, maybe now is the time I should try the mind-body bridging techniques. Because the body is like a compass, letting you know which direction you're headed. If you're feeling the muscle tension, headaches, cluttered thoughts, tightness, you might be headed into an overactive identity system, which is going to allow the emotional driver to hijack. In contrast, if you're feeling clear-headed, flexible, relaxed, calm, you're probably headed toward an identity system at rest, which allows the thinker driver to stay in charge. Now, it might sound like I'm making emotions out to be the enemy, and I really don't mean to be. They are not the enemy. Emotions are great information. If we didn't have fear, we might play in the traffic. We need fear. If we didn't have anger, we might still be a racially segregated country. We needed somebody to be angry enough about it that they caused change to happen. However, unless we are truly physically in danger, we do not need for emotions to hijack the bus. We'll function better when the thinker driver, the prefrontal cortex, is driving the bus, and it's gathering input from the emotions about what decisions need to be made, or what behavior we should have, or how to function. Emotions are not the enemy. We just don't want them to hijack the brain. And a foundational factor in stress management is to find what works best for you to keep the thinker driver in charge. And it will be a lot easier to accomplish that if you pay attention to the early warning signs and catch it early. Just like if a boat goes off course, it's easier to correct itself back to the correct course within a few feet rather than a few miles. And if the mind-body goes off course toward emotional hijack, the longer we wait, the longer it will take to calm the mind-body. So catch it early by being aware of the early warning signs. A calm body leads to a calm mind, and a calm mind leads to a calm body. And one of the best ways that I have found to quickly achieve a calm body-mind is mind-body bridging, and especially the step of coming to your senses. Let's look at one final metaphor that explains why mind-body bridging works so well. Remember the snow globes you see around the holidays? There's a peaceful scene in the middle, but you can shake up the globe so the snow obscures the scene. Well, take a look at this snow globe with a wise mind in the center. Let this represent the mind-body state in which the identity system is at rest, the thinker driver is in charge, and your true self feels connected to your inner wellspring of healing, power, goodness, and wisdom. And you feel confident that you can handle any situation. The wise mind provides natural, positive functioning. And now bring to mind the situation you wrote on your first map. At the time that situation actually occurred, perhaps the identity system exploded into a commotion machine, with scattered thoughts and body tension. Just as the snow in this picture obscures the wise mind, perhaps your mind-body state became so agitated that you did not feel connected to your inner wellspring of healing, power, goodness, and wisdom. In this state, it's difficult to function well. With the snow globe, all we have to do is let it rest, and the snow settles to the bottom, and the wise mind is once more revealed. And it's actually very similar to what the mind-body bridging tools do for us. Mind-body bridging tools calm the amygdala, which helps the identity system to rest so that you can feel connected to the inner wellspring. And the best version of your brain helps you to continue to function at your best, even in the midst of difficult circumstances. Let's recap the 3 mind-body bridging tools. There's thought labeling, coming to your senses, and mapping. Thought labeling was taking an original thought, perhaps something like, "That shouldn't have happened," and adding the phrase, "I'm having the thought that that shouldn't have happened." The original thought comes more from the emotional brain, and the very act of labeling it as a thought causes the prefrontal cortex to nudge its way back into the driver's seat. It takes the prefrontal cortex to be able to label this as a thought. It's just a thought. It doesn't mean that it's true. It doesn't mean that we have to do anything about it. It doesn't mean that we have to have an emotional response to it. We're simply labeling it as a thought. The second tool, coming to your senses, it's heightening our sensory awareness. To be able to come back to the present moment and just pay attention to what are we touching, what are we seeing, what are we hearing. Again, it takes the prefrontal cortex to be able to be aware of that. Nudges the prefrontal cortex back into the driver's seat. The identity system is a master at pulling us away from the present moment, taking us into the past with regrets or taking us into the future with fears and what ifs. And by coming back to just this present moment, what is the body experiencing in this present moment, helps to put the thinker driver back in charge, helps to calm the identity system. And then the third tool is really the Cadillac tool, mapping, because it involves all 3. It's what we did at the beginning, drawing the circle, putting the difficult situation in the center of the circle, scattering our thoughts and feelings about that to reveal what's going on with the identity system. What are our thoughts about how this should have happened? What should have happened? What was our behavior? What should our behavior have been? What should the other person's behavior have been? What are we thinking about how this situation should have occurred? Over time, to do mapping helps us to befriend the identity system, to see what are some common things that trigger the identity system. So mapping, when you've got the time for it, is really the Cadillac tool. We map, then before doing the second map, we use the thought labeling and coming to our senses to calm the identity system. And then we do the second map. And we can see how our understanding of the situation changes based on which version of the brain is driving the bus. Okay, so let's summarize what we have discussed. We talked about the brain's role in stress, that it's really a matter of which version of the brain is driving the bus, the amygdala, the emotional driver, or the prefrontal cortex, the thinker driver. and that there's a time for both, but most often we would want the thinker driver to be driving the bus, that version of the brain where the identity system is at rest. And we talked about the mind-body bridging tools that allow us to put the thinker driver back in the driver's seat. Those tools being thought labeling, coming to your senses, and mapping. And these are just a few of the key points that I hope that people remember, that it's not what happens to us that causes the most stress, but it's what we believe about what happens to us that tends to cause the most stress. Perceptions are so powerful. And a foundational factor in stress management is keeping which driver in the driver's seat? The thinker driver or the emotional driver? The thinker driver. And that we can use our body as a compass. It is a compass that gives us early warning signs that alert us to the fact that we might be on the path to an emotional hijack. And those signs are different for every person, so know what your body's early warning signs are. And if the early warning signs are telling you that maybe you're headed toward an emotional hijack, some effective ways to let the thinker driver get back in the driver's seat. There are actually lots of ways. For some people it's petting their dog. For some people it's taking a walk. For some people it is reading a book. But there are some very, very effective ways also through mind-body bridging that include label your thoughts, come to your senses, and to befriend your identity system by mapping. Because a calm body leads to a calm mind, and a calm mind leads to a calm body. Thank you for your attention.